Welcome to Climate Honesty, where we simplify complex topics to help you be better informed on energy and climate. Today, let's talk about electric cars. There's a lot of legislation being passed, has already been passed, and is being thought to be passed in the United States and around the world concerning electric cars, saying that if we go to electric cars instead of gas-powered cars, that this will have a significant impact on climate change. So in order to do an honest evaluation of whether or not this is true, we need to look at what fuels the car, what it takes to make the car, etc. So the way to do this is to look at two separate things. One of them is what it takes to drive the car down the road based on the fuel that it carries, whether it's batteries or gas. And the other is what does it take to make the car. So to make the car has a big impact as well. And the big difference between electric cars and gas cars, obviously, is the batteries, and that's the big consideration. So let's take a first look at what it takes to fuel the car. Now, a gas-powered car is powered by what's called an internal combustion engine. That internal combustion engine burns gasoline, and that's what makes the car drive down the road. An internal combustion engine has a thermodynamic efficiency of around 40%, depending on whether it's gas or diesel. What that means is that for every 10 units of energy I burn in the vehicle, only 4 of it is used to drive the vehicle forward. So the other 6 is wasted in terms of heat and inefficiency. The discharge out of the internal combustion engine is water and CO2 primarily, and the CO2 is what people are talking about as being a contributing greenhouse gas. Now, an electric car uses batteries to store the energy to drive it down the road instead of gasoline. Now, where does that electricity come from? That comes from the grid. We plug the battery into what we call the grid, which is where all the power is generated in the United States. Whenever we plug our car into there, that we're getting electricity from somewhere. That electricity has to come from somewhere. About 1/10 of the electricity comes from wind. About 2/10 comes from nuclear, so that's 3/10. That leaves the remainder coming from natural gas or coal. A little bit comes from solar, but that's only a few percent. The majority of the energy comes from the burning of fossil fuels to create our electricity. Is it more efficient to burn it in a central facility and then send that power out? That's the big question. So let's look at it. We've got natural gas as one option and coal as another. Coal has about the same thermodynamic efficiency as a car. Natural gas can have a very high efficiency. Now, the reason for this is we burn it in a turbine, just like what drives a plane or flies a plane through the air. But we take the exhaust gas, which is very hot, and we use that heat to generate steam, and that steam is then run through a turbine as well, and we call that a combined cycle. And we can get up to about 60% efficiency on that, which is important. That means 6 units out of 10 units of energy are actually used to generate electricity. That electricity is then sent through the grid to your car. It loses about 1/10 of the power to go from where the energy is generated to your car. That's about a 10% loss. It varies between 7 and 14%, but basically 1 out of 10 units is used just to push the electricity through all the power lines, through all the wires to get to your car. In the United States as a whole, considering all the power sources of coal, gas, wind, solar, nuclear, we have an overall efficiency of 50%, including line losses through the power lines that feed the grid. What that means is for every 10 units of fossil fuels I burn, I can only use 5 units of electricity from the grid. The first thing in our comparison between gas and electric is what it takes to drive the car down the road. Going from gas to electric, we have increased our efficiency by 10%, which means we would produce 10% more greenhouse gases by driving a gas car versus an electric. The next thing to think about is what does it take to make the car? Now, the difference between a gas-powered car and an electric car is about the same when you look at the steel and the glass and the rubber for the doors and all that kind of stuff. The big difference is in the batteries. So the batteries take a fair amount of energy to make. This is pretty well known and is well established in the industry. We know that that electric cars take a lot more energy to make than a gas car.
If we're going to talk about batteries, we have to talk about mining. Batteries are made up of lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, copper, among other things. And the mining of these materials has a major impact on the environment and on human beings and greenhouse gases.
So about 80% of the lithium comes from the lithium triangle down in South America, which is Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. That's done with what's called brine extraction, where we pump brine out of the ground and then we let it settle for 1 to 2 years. And that water evaporates off. We end up with a lithium base. Then we have to process that. And we process it by heating it up to between 1500 and 2000 degrees, cool it down. We heat it up again to about 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And so there's a fair amount of energy required just to convert the lithium into something we can use. And that's done using natural gas and coal, if you can imagine that. Anytime we have a high heat process, we typically need some form of fossil fuel to get that temperature. The remainder of the lithium is found throughout the world. The United States has some. Most of it's hard rock mining, where we take it and we crush it and then we process it, and similar, we have to heat it up, do all that stuff. There is a big thing going on now in the Salton Sea saying that we can get all the lithium we need out of there, and I believe that's in some form of brine. I'm not totally up to date on that, but that's still a number of years off before we can process that. Now, that's still going to require a fair amount of energy to process, even though there is geothermal energy there. We can't get the temperatures we want. So we're looking at things that exist now, not that things we hope exist in the future. Next, we have cobalt. Cobalt comes primarily from the Congo in Africa. And there's a number of human rights violations and environmental issues that go along with mining cobalt in the Congo. As you can imagine, especially as batteries become more and more prevalent, cobalt will become more and more valuable, which means we will have more and more environmental issues, because anytime money is involved, people just get greedy. Nickel's another one. We need nickel. Nickel has a lot of issues. It takes a lot of energy to process nickel into a usable form. Graphite's another one. Copper's another one. And the one thing we're not considering, we've got an energy consideration, but we also have an environmental consideration for mining. Is we're actually having to mine all these materials out of the ground. Now, mining comes with a tremendous amount of environmental impact. We dig it out of the ground, we displace the earth, and we do a lot of processing with a lot of chemicals. There's lots and lots of chemicals to make this process work, and those chemicals have environmental impacts as well. Batteries take a lot of energy and have an environmental impact associated with them. An electric car takes a lot more energy to make than a gas car. So at some point, since the electric car is more efficient running, but it takes more energy to make, there's going to be a crossover point, right? Where they're about even. There's been a lot of analysis on this. If you consider all the impacts from the mining and the processing of it, as well as everything that goes into the making of a battery, we come out to about 100,000 miles to break even.
What does that 100,000 miles mean? It means that the electric car will be more efficient after it's gone 100,000 miles, and the gas car will be more efficient before it's gone 100,000 miles. The average car in the United States travels 170,000 miles until the end of its life. The average person in the United States travels 13.5 thousand miles, which means that the car lasts 12 to 13 years. So we've looked at what it takes to drive the car down the road and found that the electric car is a little more efficient than the gas car. This is due to how the electricity is generated versus an internal combustion engine. Next, we looked at what it takes to make an electric car and found that it takes quite a bit more resources, has more environmental impact, and generates more greenhouse gases in order to make an electric car versus a gas car. Then we saw that the break-even point is about 100,000 miles, meaning that for the first 7.5 years of the car's life, the gas car would actually be more efficient, and for the last 5 years of the car's life, the electric car would be more efficient. So going to all electric cars does not have a major impact on greenhouse gas generation or climate change. Since all the energy we use for cars, not all of transportation, but cars, is only about 10% of the energy we use. So if we reduce that by a few percent, that's only a few percent overall reduction in greenhouse gases, which will not significantly impact climate change. It's much more important to deal with how we generate electricity. And this is where we really need to focus our efforts if we want to have any significant impact on reduction of greenhouse gases. I will talk about this more in future videos, and we'll dive into that a lot deeper into ways that we could potentially do this. Thanks for watching. I hope this was informative and helped you make better informed decisions about electric vehicles in the future. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Check out my channel for a deeper dive into the topics of energy and climate change.